Evet, bugün 3. oturumu başlatıyoruz. Sayın Gardner, we are ready. Okay. Evet.
Thank you, Fatma, and good morning, everyone. I hope you had a good evening last night and a comfortable rest. Today is the day where I will present 2 more lectures. This morning, talking about disciplines and understanding. And then this afternoon, my new work on the minds for the future. Yesterday, as you know, I spoke about multiple intelligences. And in the evening, after a few photographs were taken, several people approached me and said, how do you assess the intelligences, particularly with middle school or older children? And there are many, many tests that people have developed, paper and pencil tests, to assess people's intelligences. In fact, at breakfast today, I learned that there are some schools in Istanbul that have developed paper and pencil tests for multiple intelligences. And indeed, Gözde Demirelli, I hope that name is somewhat well pronounced, maybe also Dr. Yala Onur, know about these paper and pencil tests. Also, if you look in your program, there is a poster from Branton Shearer. He did not come to the conference, but he developed 15 years ago a test called the Midas, M-I-D-A-S, Midas, like the King Midas. And the Midas test has been given to thousands of people all over the world. And there's a Turkish translation of the Midas. So if you want to test for intelligences, there are many paper and pencil instruments that you can use. But I do not recommend any of these paper and pencil tests. They may be better than no tests. But if you really want to know about somebody's interpersonal intelligence, you don't ask them a group of questions and have them write the answer. You watch how they are with other people and what happens when there's a dispute or conflict. Can they resolve that conflict? If you want to know about somebody's musical intelligence, you play some music for them and see if they can remember it and if they can hear when the melody has been transformed in some way. The word we use is the assessment should be contextual. It should use the materials which people use when they actually are using an intelligence. It shouldn't be a paper and pencil substitute, ersatz, for the actual experience. So yesterday, I spoke about Project Spectrum, and I showed you the Spectrum classroom with materials to take apart and put together, musical instruments to play with and experiment with, materials to build with and tell stories about and create three-dimensional structures, a corner where we bring in specimens from nature and notice how young people describe them, group them, observe them. Games which involve logic, but also understanding your opponent. And then this clever game where you have to recreate the big class in miniature and answer questions about the people whose photographs are on the pieces of wood, or grouping those people the way they are usually grouped. Now, what I hoped you would get from this example was an idea of how you could use this approach with children who are 10 years old, or with adults who are 30 years old. And if you got the idea, that's what I call a performance of understanding. A performance of understanding involves taking an idea, a concept, a theory, and applying it appropriately in a new situation. But I failed. Many people thought that I was only talking about 4-year-olds and that you couldn't use this approach with 8 years old. I did mention Danfoss Universe, the theme park in Denmark, where there are 50 games like this, but they're made not for 4-year-olds, but for all ages. One of my favorites is the following. Almost nobody who goes to Denmark speaks Japanese. So there is a game where you hear a Japanese phrase. I can't even make one up. And then you have an opportunity to practice that phrase. And then on a screen, there's an oscilloscope where you can see the sound waves that you're making and superimpose them on an appropriate Japanese pronunciation. So, Sibel, what city are we in? Bordeaux. Again. Bordeaux. So I'm not very good. My language intelligence is not good, but I could watch a screen, and by practicing, I could make my Bordeaux closer to Sibel's. How do you say Sibel? Sibel. You get the idea? So, when a lecturer like me comes here, time is limited, and I can only give 1 or 2 examples. And if you were a good student in school, and you remembered the examples, you could probably get a good grade in the subject, in the discipline. But what I really should be doing is saying, okay, you learned about spectrum, now create an assessment for 10-year-olds. And if you really understood how spectrum worked, you could take the ideas and apply it to an older group. And that's what we call a performance of understanding. The whole lecture today, this morning, it's long, maybe difficult, is an argument, an effort to say that when people really understand something, they can make sense of something new, something they haven't been taught about before. Because if I just ask you what was in the textbook or what your teacher said, and you remember it, you might really understand it, but perhaps you just have a good memory and you have no understanding at all. But if I ask you about something from the newspaper that happened today, or from the television, or from the internet, and I say, make sense of this, explain it, and you can do it, that's a performance of understanding, because nobody told you ahead of time how to analyze what happened in Sri Lanka, or this morning in Malaysia, or in South Korea yesterday, why the president jumped off a cliff. If you can explain those things, then that's a performance of understanding. I hope this is clear. The whole lecture this morning will be an expansion of this idea. I'm going to begin by providing an intellectual background for the way I think about things. Until about 1950 or 1960, the dominant psychology approach in education was what was called behaviorism. And many of you will know that term. And psychologists interested in education only focused on the behaviors of people and how to change those behaviors. We can call it actions of people. We can even call it performances. And this behaviorist idea is so simple that every human being in the world understands it. The behaviorist idea is this: if you want somebody to do more of something, give them a reward, and they will do it more. So, if you came to Bordeaux and I wanted you to come again, and I gave you an all-expense-paid trip here and $10,000 to spend at the casino, then you might well come back again. If I didn't want you to come again, I would give you an electric shock whenever you walked into the hotel, and food that poisoned you, and you would not come back. That's the whole behaviorist theory. Just like most people still believe there's a single intelligence, which can be tested by IQ test, most people are basically behaviorists. I always say, with respect to my own children, I have 4 children, when everything else fails, I become a behaviorist, and I switch to reward or punishment. But, starting about 50 years ago, psychologists became interested in what was going on in people's minds, how people were thinking about things. The term we use is mental representation. I used that word yesterday, mental representation. And what psychologists became interested in was, for example, what is your mental representation of the country Turkey? Whether you lived here all your life, or you just came for the first time 2 days ago? What is your mental representation of multiple intelligences, of Howard Gardner, of this lecture room, of the dining hall? How do you think about it in your mind? How will you represent the 2 days here 6 months from now, 6 years from now? And these all have to do with the languages of your mind. They may or may not be visible in your behavior. One of the first thinkers that began this approach, a focus on mental representation, and also on what we call constructivism, a word that the rector used yesterday in his introduction. The idea of constructivism is we don't just pour information into people's heads. Rather, people have to build their knowledge through action, through comparisons, through contrasts, through integration. And nobody can do this for you. You have to do this construction yourself. Nobody can give you these 2 days in Bordeaux. You have to decide what to focus on, how to remember it. You meet somebody new. Do you keep their card? Do you ask them to say their name again? Do you notice whom they look like? What they sound like? What they were wearing? Is their hair the same? That's all constructive. Nobody tells you what to do. Do you take notes the way I do? Do you forget where the notes are the way that I do? This is all constructivism. It's not something that you could hand it out like a vitamin, all due respect. Piaget is a great constructivist. Many of you know his work. And many of you know the work of Vygotsky, the great Russian psychologist. Dewey, Piaget, Vygotsky, my own teacher, Jerome Bruner, are all people who were critical of the behaviorist approach, because the behaviorist approach said there is no such thing as mind. There is no such thing as mental representation. Those are all fictions. They are inventions. The only thing that counts is behavior. If you want more of a behavior, provide positive reinforcement, rewards. If you want less of behavior, ignore it or punish it, and you will extinguish the behavior through negative reinforcement. My educational goal is understanding. Whether it's working with you for 2 days or working with my students at Harvard, or working with my grandchild Oscar, who's 3, or working with myself, because I'm still trying to understand. My goal is to have conceptual structures and understandings so that I can make sense of the world. So that when I run into something new, I can figure out how to make sense of it. Yesterday, I noticed, and the non-Turkish people probably noticed, that in the dining hall, the waiters and servers were wearing hats, caps, and some of them were wearing masks. And I was curious. Why? Now, perhaps somebody gave me an explanation, but it didn't seem right to me, so then I would ask somebody else, or I would Google it, or I would find a translator and talk to the person. But I'm trying to understand something, And we go through life trying to make sense of things in whatever way we can. And if I had a genuine understanding of why people wore these materials, I could probably make sense of something else that I saw on the streets or in the kitchen or in the laundry or elsewhere. The contrast is what we call inert knowledge. Inert knowledge is just things that you memorize, but you don't know how to use it. Superstring theory. Have you all heard of superstring theory in physics? If you ask me, I would say to you that most of us think the world, the universe, is composed of 3 dimensions, or maybe 4, if you include time. But superstring theory claims that there are 10 or 11 different dimensions. If I was asked on a paper and pencil test about superstring theory, and I was given 4 choices, I might get the right answer. I have no idea what superstring theory means, none. And so, the right way to assess me would be to show me some result from the Hadron Collider, recently opened and closed in Switzerland, and say, how does this bear on the Higgs particle, the Higgs boson? And if I knew something really about superstring theory, I could say, well, this makes the Higgs particle more likely or less likely. But if I have no understanding, I would only get that answer correct if somebody told me, oh, it's because of this, this, and this. Why do we care about understanding? Because if all children get in school is inert knowledge, collection of facts, when they walk away from school, they will know nothing. Because it's all left back in the test. But if they genuinely understood about multiple intelligences or constructivism or the theory of evolution, they could make use of that understanding when they had to make sense of something unfamiliar. That's what's wrong with paper and pencil tests, whether they are tests about superstring theory or tests about evolution or tests about what multiple intelligences your students have. They probably will not give you a good measure of understanding. Now, some tests are better than others, and if you only have an hour, you probably end up using a paper and pencil test. But don't fool yourself that you're really probing understanding, because you probably are not. Let me tell you the most important finding about education from cognitive science. Cognitive science is the field that I was describing, Piaget, Brunner, and so on. The most important finding from cognitive science is this. When you examine excellent students at excellent universities and give them a paper and pencil test, they will do very well. And you will say, they are smart and I am a good teacher. And then you'll both be happy. If you take the same students and ask them to use that knowledge to explain something new, not only will they not do well, they will perform no differently than students who never took that course. And those of you familiar with this literature, like Mickey Singer and Eric DeCourt will confirm there are hundreds of studies from all over the world showing that students in physics, biology, economics, who get high scores and go to the very best universities, when they were asked to use that knowledge to explain something new, they couldn't do it. This is really important. There's no way to sweep this away and say, oh, it doesn't matter. In a book called The Disciplined Mind, I argued that by the age of 5, children all over the world have developed theories about the world. These theories are sometimes correct. For example, if the child is crawling and the child gets to the edge of the stage and looks down, the child has a theory that they're going to get hurt if they just fall down. That's a correct theory. Often the theories are charming. We all like to hear the answers 5-year-olds give to existential questions. But typically, the child's theories, the 5-year-old theories, are wrong. Why are they wrong? Not because the child is stupid. Not because the child doesn't want to understand. Children love to understand. The reason the child doesn't have the correct theory comes from evolution. We did not evolve as a species to have correct theories about the world. Theories about the planets, theories about digestion, theories about the business cycle. We actually evolved for only one reason: to live long enough to reproduce. Remember those finches? The ones that didn't have the big beaks, the thin beaks, they're not here anymore on an island. But the ones who survived with the big beaks, they're still here because they were able to reproduce, have little finchettes. I want to show you a visual. I'm going to show this to you later in the lecture, but I think it may help you understand the lecture if I show you this visual first. I call this an empiricist barn. You know what a barn is? It's a large building on a farm where you store hay and where the cows go at night sometimes, or the lambs, or the hens, the chickens. According to the behaviorist or empiricist approach, all infants have a blank slate. They don't know anything. It's a tabula rasa, a blank slate. And because young people are good at learning facts, they can often beat us in games if it's just remembering information or where a card is on a table. Learning is picking up facts. And because young people learn well, they have more facts. And eventually, their mind is filled with facts. And you know, if you have a lot of facts, you know what you can do? You can do well on one of those paper and pencil tests, right? Because you can pick out which of the 4 statements is about superstring theory, or Darwin's finches, or what happened in 1453 on May 29th, correct? I saw that on a poster in Bordeaux this morning. May 29th, 1453? Nobody's shaking their head. Anyway, there's another kind of barn, and this is the kind of barn that people like me believe in. And it comes from the constructivist approach of Dewey, Piaget, Vygotsky, Brunner. And that's the belief that even when children are young, they already have theories of the world. And these theories are quite powerful, but they're often wrong. Let me give you my favorite example. Yesterday you saw my son Benjamin. He was the one pushing the stroller. That was when he was 18 months. When he was 5 years old, I said, Benjamin, what is the shape of the world? And he said, Dad, it's round. And I said, that's very good, Benjamin. And I said to myself, does he have a misconception? So I said, Benjamin, the world is round. Where are you? And he said, that's easy, Dad. I'm on the flat part underneath. So he knew the right answer on multiple choice, the world is round. But he could see the world was flat. So what is this world being round? Maybe there's something called the world that's round, but I'm on the flat, firm part. And you can see for us to survive, it makes more sense to believe that the world is flat, except you don't want to fall off the stage, than to think it's round, because where would you be? You'd be dizzy all the time. So we start with these powerful, flawed theories. And this is what education is about, in my view. Two things. One, we have to challenge those early theories. We have to show the flaws in the theory. At the same time, children will learn facts. They are fact gatherers. So the two processes are to show what's wrong with the theories. How come Columbus thought he could go around the world? What happened to him? And what happens to us now when we fly in one direction? If we fly long enough, we come back to where we were. If the world was flat, that wouldn't make any sense. You could try to get rid of these theories by challenging them, by showing them their inadequacies, and you have more of these facts floating around. Then, disciplinary structures begin to emerge. And I'll explain what that means. The structures of science, history, mathematics, the arts, many other structures. And then the facts find a home. Facts about atoms and electrons and gravity and force and thermodynamics, they gather around physics. Facts about supply and demand, the business cycle, interest rates, depression, credit default swaps, something I'd never heard of, gather around economics and finance. Facts about reinforcement, mental representations, developmental stages, motivation and emotion, gather around psychology and the mind. That's what education should achieve. And then you have consolidated disciplinary structures. And if I get to it later, I will talk about how we do interdisciplinary work, how we connect the disciplines. So I'm going to go back a bit now. By the age of 5, the child already has these theories, sometimes right, often charming, often wrong. As far as I'm concerned, from a cognitive point of view, school has two primary tasks. The first years of school are to acquire the literacies: reading, writing, elementary mathematics, arithmetic. And there's no disagreement about this around the world. Hasn't been a disagreement for hundreds of years. Some people might add religion, ethics, morality, learning about the state of the nation, but everybody agrees you have to learn to be literate, read, write, calculate. We know how to do this if we have good teaching and motivated students, and it should be done by the time students are ready for middle school. As far as I'm concerned, the only reason to continue going to school is to achieve disciplinary understanding. And now, in the 21st century, I will argue this afternoon, and maybe this morning, interdisciplinary understanding, combining the disciplines. I think that's the only reason to continue to go to school. But all over the world, which I'm afraid includes Turkey and Burdur, it certainly includes the United States, it may even include Singapore, people confuse subject matter with discipline. What I call subject matter is knowing a lot of those facts, a lot of information. Napoleon was born in 1767 in Corsica. That's a fact. The Earth is 93 million miles away from the Sun. That's a fact. Every day, 2 trillion American dollars circulate around the world. That's a fact. It's great to know those facts. And if you're asked on a test about 1767, 93 million, or 2 trillion, you get the right answer. Very good. Subject matter has nothing to do with disciplines. Facts are discipline neutral. They only acquire meaning when they're organized around other facts and concepts. So, the location of the Earth in the solar system makes sense when you understand that the Sun is a star and why the planets evolve around the Sun and how long it takes and why we don't burn up because the Sun is so hot. Then that fact begins to take on meaning. Who is Napoleon? What does 1767 mean? Why do we care? It's when you know that other information, you can put it together, that you can begin to think historically. Similarly, when you can put together facts about finance or facts about behavior and thought, then you can think in the disciplines of economics or psychology. But most people, most educators around the world think if you know a lot of facts about your subject that you have disciplinary thinking, but by and large, you don't. Because you can't have disciplinary thinking except, number one, undermine, destroy those erroneous theories, those misconceptions, and number two, construct a better, more accurate disciplinary view. What it means to think scientifically, what it means to think historically. I'm going to stop at this point because I'm going to ask you to talk to your neighbor. I hope not about the weather, but rather about what I've just said and whether it makes sense to you, whether it seems new, whether you knew it all before or whether you're confused. I can't talk with all of you, but this is a performance of understanding that you can do with your neighbor. So if you take a few minutes to do that, that would make me happy. Thank you.